So thank you for joining us. First of all, this is kind of our kickoff info session for the semester, so we're glad that we can help provide some resources. We know a lot of students during this time are thinking about grad school, what it entails, what that search and application process looks like. And so this session is really to kind of give a general overview, to provide some of those details, and then to offer ourselves as a resource to go more in depth with you as you go throughout this process. And so this can be for students in their senior year about to get ready to apply, or for freshmen or sophomore just thinking about the possibility, or for juniors who are kind of looking in that direction after grad school. So with this session, okay, so with our search, with today's session, we're going to go over a few different categories. We're going to go over our searching resources and strategies, some of the different application components, as well as touching on what are some of the funding opportunities that are out there and what's terminology that's often associated with that. Because sometimes students don't realize all of the different options to get help in paying for grad school, so we want to make sure that you're aware of those resources. Okay, so a few points to consider while you're beginning this grad school journey. First, is a graduate degree necessary for my desired field of interest? So thinking about if you've identified a career path or a category or an industry that you want to go into, have you looked at people in that industry and noticed a commonality of that they have graduate degrees? Or do you know for sure that that is going to be a requirement for an industry or direction that you want to go? And knowing the answer to this question will help you make that decision whether or not grad school needs to be your next steps after your undergrad. Next, is a graduate degree necessary to make growth or make a career change? And so sometimes students get towards the end of their academic career in undergrad and realize that they kind of want to go in a different direction than they originally anticipated. And sometimes graduate school is a great way to facilitate that. And so if you see yourself wanting to take some redirection and thinking about, would a graduate degree help you build on that content knowledge that will help you make that career pivot or career decisions? And then lastly, asking about, are you passionate about a certain area and you want to continue to learn more? So you have your major in undergrad, is there a desire there to continue and to deepen even further that content knowledge that you have? And if so, then graduate school may be a natural step for you to take in developing and facilitating that knowledge growth. So these are just some questions to consider as you're thinking about grad school, because it is an important decision and it takes time, money, and effort. And so you want to make sure that you're considering it carefully and taking the decisions and making that decision after a lot of consideration. So that's why we wanted to touch on some of these main questions that students should be thinking about. Another point we wanted to discuss is, let me minimize. There we go. So applications during the time of COVID-19. So as with every aspect of life, the pandemic this year has affected the process for applying to graduate school in a variety of different ways. And so we want to make sure that students are prepared and are able to recognize some of those changes and kind of adjust and take that into account as they're going through the application process. So here are some things to keep in mind. Now more than ever, it's important to do the research, because different programs and different schools have made decisions about what they want their grad school application process to look like this year. And so as you're trying to identify where you want to apply, doing that research now, doing it early, is going to help you process and understand what you're going to need to succeed in those applications. Some of those components will be the deadlines may have changed. So depending on if the academic year has shifted for any schools or programs, that may also influence when their graduate school applications are going to be due. So you need to keep that in mind, and also keep an eye out for if they've changed or adjusted their application process. So some places are still old school and you have to do paper documents, but that may have changed because of people working remotely in some areas. So just keeping that in mind and so why that research is a crucial part. Also, some requirements may be waived that were otherwise that have been a requirement in previous years. And one of the biggest examples we're seeing are some programs are not requiring a graduate admissions exam, which I'll touch on in a little bit. Some still are, and so knowing there's no like uniformity across disciplines or across programs, and so identifying which programs you want to apply to and knowing whether or not they've waived certain aspects of the application, particularly the graduate exams. And then also be prepared for variations in instruction once you actually get to a program. That we know that this fall it looks a little bit different and schooling looks a little bit different, but those reverberations and implications may continue in different schools and different states, in different locations for different amount of times. And so just keeping that in mind as you're thinking about what that graduate experience is going to look like, be prepared for that adaptability and those differences and changes to occur. So just having these points before we really begin, a big question that students often have is, how do they research schools in the first place? How do you even look up and figure out what graduate programs are out there? The first aspect of that is identifying criteria in a program that's really important for you. And so this will be a very personal list and will differ by individuals. So for some, if they're going into academic programs, the faculty advisor who they'll work with will be an important relationship and component to the decision process. The location, so where a school is located, may be a make or break point for some individuals. Research focus is a big thing to consider, particularly for academic programs, and if it kind of aligns with the research that you want to do and the work you want to do post-graduation. Funding options and opportunities may be important, as well as accreditations and acceptance rates. And I know some students now are considering, like with MBA programs, do they offer online options? And what are the accessibility of those programs? So again, this list will vary by individual, and it's really about thinking about what your values are and what you want to get out of the experience and using that to kind of help you narrow down, because otherwise you'll get really overwhelmed by the amount of programs that are out there. There are a lot of options, and so you have to find some parameters that work for you. So once you've kind of decided what some of those key components of those programs are, there are a lot of different websites that offer kind of a really thorough lists and break down different schools and the programs that they offer. Some of the popular ones are gradschools.com, petersons.com, graduateguide.com, US News and World Report has best graduate schools list, and then princetonreview.com is another great resource to start identifying those different types of programs. And another way, once you get a list of potential schools, go to the individual department websites for those programs, because that will provide you even more information and details in terms of the professors that work there, their research, graduate students that are already enrolled, kind of what some of the expectations are. And those department websites are often where you're going to find the grad school like application requirements. So that's going to be a place that you want to research and explore from the beginning. So these are kind of some points and strategies and resources to help you during that search process. And then once you start identifying and narrowing down your list, you're going to come across different application components. And this will vary by discipline sometimes, and then also if you're going into like pre-professional programs, MBA programs, and academic programs, there is some variation. But there's also a few commonalities that we can touch on as well. So, grad school applications are comprised of several different components, so making sure that you identify the ones for your schools that you want to apply to is crucial, and that's why it's going to be important to stay organized. And I'll touch on a resource that we have that can help you in that process. So some of the examples of materials are the graduate admissions test, which I touched on, and that is an option where it may be waived, it may not be. So you'll have to determine what is a requirement for your programs. So this is, for example, the GRE, the GMAT, the LSAT, those types of exams that you've heard about in that as a part of that application process. Next, you'll have CVs or resumes that you'll have to include. Personal statements, or sometimes called a statement of purpose, is another document that is often a component of grad school applications. Letters of recommendation, your college transcripts, and the actual application itself. So there usually is a form that you have to complete as part of this process. And so in the next few slides, I'm going to go over these different components and kind of break down some of this information and elaborate a little bit more. And then also you're going to want to determine if funding applications are included in that general process. Some programs will just automatically consider you for funding if you apply. Other times you have to kind of fill out additional paperwork. And so seeing if that information is on the website, and if you're not or something confuses you, I always encourage the students to reach out to the administrative staff members in the department websites. Their information is usually included in the contact. So they're a great resource to ask about kind of some of the logistics, because they handle a lot of that process oftentimes. And so, as I said, this can sometimes feel overwhelming for students, that you have those worries of like, there's a lot of different components, and once you start adding on more and more schools that you want to apply to, it can be overwhelming in terms of the amount of information that you're keeping track of. And so that's why on WestNet, so if you go to WestNet and go to career development, we have a template that we've created that students can download, and you can tailor it and cater it to your exact needs, but it gives a lot of categories that are often helpful to know kind of and be able to recall rather quickly. And so we really encourage you to stay organized in using a document like this, or you can go on to WestNet and download this exact template. We've provided it as a resource. And so let's touch a little bit more in depth about these different application components. And the first is going to be the graduate admissions tests. So first, as I've mentioned multiple times, you're going to want to identify, is the program going to require an exam this application cycle? And so knowing whether yes or no is going to be an important point to help you plan what's going to be required for you. Another thing you need to consider is, what is the testing schedule? And in addition to that, has the process been changed due to COVID-19 procedures? And so we know some of these testing programs have had virtual options, some are occurring in person, and so it's really looking and identifying what their procedures and policies are for the fall semester. And looking at that now, if you're a senior, and planning ahead, because some of these exams are only offered during certain points of the semester, and so you don't want to miss a date that would work well for your schedule. So looking at these different websites now is going to be an important part of that process. And then also making sure to know whether or not you're going to need testing accommodations. There is a process to apply for accommodations in taking these exams, and we actually have some resources about this on WestNet. But knowing this ahead of time is important, because, there we go, sorry, I lost my screen there for a second. Is important because it's a kind of a process, so some of it may take a little bit of time. So knowing this is going to be crucial. And then also, do you qualify for fee waivers? That some of these tests will waive their application fee based on financial necessity. So that's a thing you want to research and explore because it can get expensive, especially if you have to take an exam more than once. And so doing a little bit of preparation and knowing whether you qualify for that is also a good thing to explore. So the next component are CVs and resumes. So you'll need to determine which type of document the application will require. And again, this will vary based on discipline. And so I'll plug the CCD because you can visit our offices to explore the differences between these two documents because they're similar in some ways, but they also have some key differences. And we have samples of both types and can help you walk through how to prepare those documents for an application process. And they're also available on WestNet. The next type of application component we'll touch on are personal statements. And so this is something that students often have questions about what is a personal statement, what information needs to be included, what is it, why is it required for an application. And so a personal statement is a narrative that explains who you are and why you want to go to grad school. And really in particular, why you want to apply to that specific program. It's a way where you can elaborate on information that's included on other parts of your application, so like your resume or your CV. A personal statement can often be broken down into two components or two parts. So if you're making your outline and kind of structuring how you want to write this document, you can think of these two different aspects as you're making preparations. The first is where you're going to talk about the work and research you have completed during your undergraduate years. So you're talking a little bit about your past self and what got you interested in your field or industry, the work that you've done and how you've contributed to the field during the time prior to going to graduate school. The second half, or the second component, will be you talking about the work you will do for that particular program or in the industry as a whole. Because oftentimes grad programs see their students as an investment, that they're allowing you, they're having you come to their program, they're bringing you in because they want to help you grow and develop so you then make a contribution to the field. And so being able to think about and explain why grad school is important and why that particular program is really an important part of your development is an important skill to have, and you'll be able to communicate that in your personal statement. And one crucial thing about personal statements is that students sometimes have the reaction that they like, oh, I'll only write one and use it for all the different applications. And you really can't do that, particularly because of this second component of a personal statement, that you really need to tailor it to the individual programs, because I promise you these grad school committees have read a lot of personal statements and they can see can tell when a student has put in the effort to really make it about their program versus something that's like where they just copied and pasted the name of the school into their personal statement. And so I really try and stress when I'm talking with students that this is why you need to give yourself some time to prepare these documents, because it does take a little bit of effort to make it specific to a particular program. For some academic programs, you will see a requirement for like a personal statement and a research statement. And we can talk more in depth, but it's touching on these two topics, but in separate papers. So you talk about your personal development, the work that you've done, and a personal statement. And then with research, thinking about the work that you want to do within that particular program. So those are personal statements. And again, we have resources that we can provide for you, and we can work with you to develop a strong statement for your applications. Next, we're talking about letters of recommendation. So many of you may have had or asked someone to write a letter of recommendation for you for something, whether it was for a scholarship or a trip or a club. So this may not be a new concept, but for a letter of recommendation, you want to make sure to ask someone who is familiar with your work and can speak to your experiences. And for grad school, you often have to ask multiple people. So I know in my personal experience, it was about like 3 to 4 people had to write letters of recommendation for one program. And so being able to think about, okay, who have I worked with? Who is familiar with my coursework and my academic work? Who's familiar with my leadership skills and abilities? Who would be able to speak well to who you are and why you would be a good fit and new member to that program. As you are asking them and talking with them about that process, make sure to offer or to provide them a resume, a CV, some kind of statement that helps them put some context to your work and just helps them refresh their memory of the experiences that you've had with them, because especially if they're professors, they worked with a lot of undergrad students, and you want to make sure that they are able to recall your work pretty easily. So offering them some kinds of documents or a point of reference is always a good practice. And another key point, and this is some feedback we've gotten from professors before, is that you want to give them plenty of time to write the letters. So just say, for example, your application is due November 1st. You do not want to ask your recommenders to write your letter on October 25th. But that is not enough time for them, especially if they're professors with a full course load this semester, for them to really sit down and dedicate the time to writing a strong letter of recommendation. They may get something turned in, but you don't know what kind of quality that would be. And so you want to make sure that you give a heads up for your recommenders, make sure that they are willing to do so, and that just gives them enough time to prep and prepare based around the other work that they have to complete over the semester. And so know the different application requirements for submitting letters, that this process may vary. The most common is that once you submit the actual application, it'll send like an email prompt to your recommenders for them to complete a document, but some programs may still be old school and ask for physical letters. I did have one program that I had to mail actual letters to the department. So that's less common now, but you just want to be aware in case there are any variations of what that process will look like. Next, I do want to talk a little bit about funding opportunities, because again, we notice that this can often be a time or a component that students are unaware of, and they don't know how to do or what to research and kind of how to advocate for themselves in terms of getting funding for graduate school. So let me first touch a little bit on some of the key terminology that's involved. But one category you want to make a note of are assistantships. So the most popular types of assistantships you'll see are research or teaching. And so if you're in academic programs, this is almost kind of like a student employment in some ways, where you contribute to the program, whether you're doing research with a professor or in a lab, or you're acting as a teaching assistant in the classroom. And then in exchange for that, you'll often get they'll waive your tuition costs, and then you'll get a stipend where you'll be paid monthly or over the course of the semester. So this is something to look at when you're looking at application options. The next term are fellowships, and this is more aligned with what you'll know as like traditional scholarships. So these are often academic based, and they offer you funding for an exchange and in hopes that you will produce important work for the field or the discipline. So keep an eye out if you read or hear about any fellowship opportunities. And then I mentioned before the term tuition waivers, that some programs offer it differently, but this means that it covers the cost of your tuition. So it basically wipes out that component of the application process. So if you hear or see anything about tuition waivers, that's something to keep in mind. There are different levels and places to look for opportunities. The department itself will offer funding options for some of its students. And then also the broader university may have funding opportunities for graduate students, that it doesn't have to be a field specific or discipline specific, that like in the administrative departments or residence life, or there are other opportunities that will often offer campus wide. So kind of looking at both levels for those options. And then also outside organizations, particularly that are identity based, will offer funding and like fellowship opportunities for students. And there are a lot of them out there. So research national organizations, nonprofit organizations, like I said, any of those identity based groups, oftentimes they will have resources to help facilitate education and graduate school programs. So I know that's a lot of information to kind of take in terms of the different components. So I don't want to go into too much depth about each of these, but as I've talked about them and you want to learn more, please feel free to reach out to either Stephanie or myself about these different components, and we'll help you and can talk more in depth about how to prepare and build up these different documents. And so I kind of wanted to end this presentation in asking two kind of questions that I know students may be thinking about. So if you're a senior, you may have the, what do I need to be doing if I'm a senior wanting to apply to grad school this year? So it's August, the beginning of the year, what needs to be happening to make this happen for this year? Here are some of the things. First, finalize the list of programs you want to apply to. And do that pretty soon within the next couple of weeks, because that's going to kind of inform the rest of the process. So this will help you identify your deadlines and all the application requirements that I touched on. And it'll also help you prioritize the applications that are due first. So some programs and disciplines, it's all going to be due on one date. Others will have rolling deadlines. Some will be due in the fall, some will be due early winter, January, February. So again, that's why the spreadsheet that we talked about can be really useful in helping you stay on track of those deadlines. Right now, you should be asking people who you want to write your letters of recommendation. So don't put this off too much. Go ahead and put that idea in their head to see if they're going to be willing to do so, just so they'll be prepared and ready for when those applications come. If you have to take a graduate exam, so if you've looked at those programs and yes, they're still requiring the GRE, or you still have to take the GMAT, look at the testing schedule and determine when you're going to need to take that exam if you haven't already. Because like I said, those will be certain dates and certain locations that those will take place in. And then go ahead and start working on writing samples if they're required, or personal statements that you will need to submit. Because remember, we talked about, and I explained that they're going to need to be personalized based on the applications that you turn in. And so knowing that now and preparing that now will help you not feel rushed right when it becomes time for those applications to be due. So really, this is kind of my key list. So if you're a senior and you want to apply for the next year, like apply this application cycle, these are some things that you need to be starting or already doing and thinking about, so you're not waiting until the last minute. And the next one, maybe you're a junior, or really even if you're a sophomore or freshman, they can be, what do I need to be doing if I'm interested in applying to grad school at that point? And here's some examples. Oh, it's appearing fancy this time. Okay. Research, research, research. So ask and answer some of those questions that were at the beginning of this presentation. Think about what your future career plans are and determine if a graduate degree is necessary for your next steps. Like I said at the beginning, it's a lot of time and effort and money that you'll be expending, and so you want to make sure that it's for a purpose and not just because you don't know what else to do, which you can find yourself in grad school, but if you can go into it knowing and having that clear direction, that will just help you succeed all the more. Next, talk to your professors and the CCD, that your professors have experience with grad school, that they went to their programs, So they know what the process is like and what could be come as a result of that. And the CCD can also help you explore what some of your options are and ways to think about, like we said, whether that graduate degree is a crucial component. So just doing that research and communication will be a vital step for you. Once you know some of that information, start exploring potential programs. Like I said, you'll start with feeling that overwhelmed that, oh, there's too many options. So start thinking about and looking at, well, do they offer a field or a specific topic that I'm really interested in? Or is this in a location that I want to live in? Or do they have an advisor that I can work with? Really, that's why identifying what's important to you can help you as you go through this process. Next, get experience. And so as you're kind of in that research period of determining whether grad school is important for you, it's also important to get some experience that you can add on your resume or your CV. So depending on your discipline, it may be important to really get an internship, or a research project or lab work may be really beneficial for your preparations, or a different type of experiential learning opportunity. And so that's when coming and talking to the CCD can help provide some clarification about that process and thinking about, okay, what do I need to be doing to really round out my resume or CV and show that I'm serious about developing in this field. Then lastly, make connections. So do you have a scholar or a professor or someone in the field or industry whose work interests you? Then see if they are able, or see if there's a way to communicate with them. Or is there an alumna in an industry that you want to explore? Reach out and see if you can conduct some informational interviews. Because really, with grad school, the more people you know, the more beneficial it can be because of the connections that you'll make prior to that application process. And then also, we really encourage students to join national organizations in your discipline, because now they often offer students a really reduced price, or it's totally free for a student to join a national organization. And they just provide a lot of resources and information that are important for students and people in the field to know. So I know this was kind of a lot of information, and it's our main goal is really just to kind of help you and make sure that you're aware of what this process entails, and to provide you some points to think about and ways to prepare these documents and to know what you need to be doing in order to not feel overwhelmed during this process. So I do want to open it up. If anyone has a question they want to ask, or if they're at a particular stage or they need a little bit of clarity, we'd be happy to answer any questions. So go ahead, if you have one that you want to ask, feel free to do so. Any question? Okay, well, if no one has any questions, we do want to offer, or here's our You Can Book Me links. So like I said, if you need to process a little bit of what we've talked about here today and want to talk more in depth about something we've shared, this is Stephanie and my You Can Book. And so we'd be happy to talk with you, walk you through that process. And we're here as a resource through all the different steps and components of the grad school application process. So we hope this has been informative and it's helped you as you go on your career and exploration journey. And we hope to see you at another session soon.